It is May the 4th. I guess there's a Star Wars joke in there. Don't have it for you though, but I am super excited because we have sex therapist Michelle Hope joining us to discuss this was actually our March read, Luster by Raven Leilani. And part of why we thought it was really important to bring in someone like Michelle is because we've read several books that focus on Black women characters exploring their sexuality through the lens of feeling invalidated and having very sort of traumatic sexual experiences. So we wanted to give, some space to interrogate the themes that have come up in books like Queenie and now Luster, and provide some advice for our audience who has a ton of thoughts and a ton of questions. There was so much commentary when we read Luster back in March. So welcome. Michelle actually read Luster for us. This is a very special conversation.
It was kinky.
It was. So we have a lot of questions about the sort of like, is it fair to call it violence, or the sort of like S&M BDSM themes that were in the book?
Well, I think first and foremost, when we start to discuss BDSM or sadomasochism, SM, we have to remember that it should not be violent. While you are role playing and you are in a space, all things should be agreed upon. And when I think of violence, especially sexual violence, in today's context, right? Um, it really should be consensual. And I think that there were spaces in this book where that wasn't necessarily what we saw. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that a part of that goes to communication, right? Sometimes when we're sexually active, and my lights just turned off, sorry.
It's okay. We can still see
Okay,
you.
hold on, I'm so sorry. Sorry. Sorry about that.
No
I
worries.
think I think that sometimes we go down this road filled with passion and we're just in the moment and we haven't had the conversations to discuss what we like and what we don't like. And while in the moment it might be like, oh my gosh, that was such a thrill. That was so kinky. But then later on, it may bring up things. So I think that came up for me quite a bit, is that when when is it we're pushing the envelope in our play, and when have we crossed the line?
Mm.
And I think the lack of conversation is when you've crossed the line. So we did see that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to get into the first question submitted from our audience, which gets right into this topic we've already broached. And they're saying, I was enthralled with Eddie's inability to complete a self portrait. How does our perception of our bodies and flaws impact our ability to have pleasure?
A lot, and believe it or not, body consciousness is one of the most fears when it comes to sex, right? It's not like, oh, I'm worried I'm not going to perform well. It's usually about, oh, what if somebody doesn't like my body? My vulva or my vagina doesn't look like what I've seen in pornography. And oftentimes, let's face it, ladies, your labias don't look perfect like what we see in pornography. Um, and because of that, when we are examining our own bodies, we start to think that it's less than what the standard is. And when you don't have body confidence, it impacts your ability to relax. Like, the most important part of sex is the brain.
Mm.
Okay. I know Missy Elliott said, pussy don't fail me now. But really, we got to remember, and I apologize for the language,
Oh,
but
no, go ahead. We're
we,
adults here.
we got to remember that the brain is first. So if you don't feel good about your body, then you're not going to be able to feel as free sexually,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think it's very telling, like not being able to draw a photo of your body or describe it is very telling. And that is why one of the things that I often tell people I work with is, dance naked in the mirror, love your curves, love your dimples, love your scars, because you've earned them,
I was just
right?
having this conversation the other day because I realized I've never sent a nude. And I was like, I think that's one of that, it's rooted in just, I don't trust people. But the other one is rooted in like, am I comfortable in my skin? Am I comfortable in my body? And realizing that I need to do more work around just embracing the body that, allows me to do the work that I do. Like, I should give it grace.
Yeah, I mean, social media and porn have not helped us. We're all out here taking flat tummy teas, using these waist trainers.
Mm.
And what we really need to remember is like during the Victorian era and in a lot of cultures, thicker women are praised. And that has his, I don't know when heroin chic came in,
Mm.
and then but curving, and then it came out, and then now it's everybody wants black features with our lips, and they're getting lip injections and breast implants and BBLs and all these things. And it's like we have to love all.
Oh, did she freeze? I think you froze. Oh no. It was getting so good. All right, give it a minute and hopefully she comes back in. Aw, I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what happened to their Wi Fi. I'm gonna hang up just so their face doesn't look like this. And just give it a minute. Sorry, we always have technical difficulties and they're coming back. Oh, it was so good. I don't know why it's doing this, and I don't have any filler for y'all. Because this is all about the sex therapist being able to give us her insight. Um, there will be a second discussion that gets posted on my Patreon for all the more personal and private questions that were asked, because we're just going to do for the book club book specific luster themed questions. So that'll be up tomorrow. Hopefully, if we can get Michelle back in. I don't know if their Wi Fi went out or not.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what
Okay.
happened.
I don't
I'm
know either.
sorry.
Just froze. It's
It
fine. We're going to
kicked
keep
me
going.
out. It kicked me out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay because the whole site crashed. So I
Oh,
just put it on
wow.
my phone. So I'm sorry, everyone. Thank you for your patience.
But you can finish what you were saying about
Um, what was I saying?
we're talking
Remind me,
about body
please.
positivity and enjoying your
Oh
body
yeah,
and social media not helping.
this idea that social media puts pressure on us to look a certain way, and also what you have to remember with social media, those algorithms are actually focused on white European beauty standards.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why lighter complected women get elevated. The algorithm is a nasty thing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, I've definitely done videos on this. It is absolutely horrible.
it is anti-black, it is anti-everything. So that's what I have to say about that. But we just have to love ourselves in a way that allows us space to be who we are.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is, can you say Edie was into light pain BDSM with Eric? And can you also define what people mean by BDSM?
So BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the deal, people. I think a lot of us, sex is a space where we are able to release, right? In the work that I've done, I found that people who have a lot of power at work oftentimes enjoy being submissive in the bedroom. And I think that in this situation, I think a little bit of us, we're all into light pain. We're all into this pushing ourselves to the edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's because I'll be a tinker's darned if I haven't had enough conversations with very conservative men and women,
Yeah.
and I'll go with women first who are like, I like to be spanked and choked. Because it is you're relinquishing power. Sex is all about power and control. And for some, it's the ability to lose power and control. And for others, it's the ability to really own the power and control.
Mm. So do you think that Eddie was into light pain and BDSM with Eric?
I I think so. I think there was a vulnerability there, and
Mm-hmm.
this wanting to wanting to relinquish and play with that power dynamic, right? Because it kind of goes both ways, right? You have to be very confident to relinquish power, and then you also have to have a lot of confidence to take on the role of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a huge responsibility there, huge responsibility. But I also think that, the writing of this book was so incredible and painted so many beautiful pictures for us, and really allowed us to lose ourselves in the characters. And I know I lost myself in Eddie,
I wanted to
right?
like shake the shit out of Eddie personally. I wanted to just like,
Yeah.
girl, wake the fuck up. Like, what are you doing to yourself?
But here's the thing. There are spaces in which we don't know why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it might be a trauma that we've not processed.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to believe that it was trauma. And so in that case, especially when it comes to sexual trauma, sometimes depending on the experience, you will try to replicate that because that's what feels normal. That's what feels safe. That's how you've established what feels normal, what feels safe, even when it's not, even when you're like, come on, child, we can't go down this road. For whatever reason, that's where Eddie went to feel safe, but it wasn't a safe space, right? Like it didn't match. So
Yeah. So continuing on this conversation about S&M, someone said they were slightly disturbed by the abuse and sex combination, and they did not see it as S&M. But it felt like it wanted to be that. They thought that it lacked the ability to effectively communicate their desires. So, how do you heal that kind of trauma while still embracing what you want sexually, even if it's physical?
well, I think you have to first accept that there is the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then you have to set your boundaries. And one thing I encourage people to do is if you have had an experience of sexual trauma, you need to disclose that before you hop in the bed with someone.
Oh.
Because anything can, I know it sounds crazy.
That this
And you
sounds so
don't,
intense every time. Like, it almost kind of like, I think, wouldn't you be worried about killing the mood? Like, not the other person's mood, but even your own mood. Having to
no, you
kind.
can't be saying, come on now. We can't be saying, these are conversations that we should be having well before we're hot and heavy in the bedroom.
Oh.
And
okay.
I have a resource. But like these are conversations, and this is where we go wrong. This is where we end up down a road where we're like, wait, do I like this? Do I not like this? Is this BDSM? Is this abuse? Because we didn't have these conversations leading up to. We oftentimes do not disclose our experiences around sex because we have a lot of shame. But you have to be able to acknowledge what has happened and if that has caused you a trauma. And trauma sometimes is not physical. Trauma can be rooted in your religious background and the slut shaming that goes into you need to be this type of woman, you need to be this type of purity. And somewhere you have to be able to, one, acknowledge it for yourself, and two, disclose in a way that feels comfortable to you. Because God forbid you get in it, because oftentimes what people do is they don't say a word. They might not like what's happening and they don't say anything. And then the other person doesn't know. That ain't Miss Cleo. They're not a psychic. This ain't the Psychic Friends Network. They can't read minds. So if you don't tell them, and now here's the other part of this. We teach in heteronormative relationships and gender roles. We teach men to push and push and push. And push the envelope a little more, and push the envelope a little more, and push the envelope a little more until they get what they want. And now you combine that with a lack of sex education, a lack of communication, and ability to have communication around sex, because that's a different kind of language. Okay? Then you not saying nothing, they're not saying nothing, and they're taught, well, no means no, but if you don't say no, people just assume it's a yes.
Yep.
Which is totally false. Consent needs to be enthusiastic. It needs to be active. But see, these are conversations we're not having and we're not teaching. And here's the big kicker. If we don't start these conversations with young children, they grow up to be adults, because our learning is built upon experiences. We learn something through experiences, and then that whatever new information we get is added to what we've already had. Then that is added. One of the reasons why I like to tell people, not every pussy is the same. No pussy is alike, so you can't pull out them old dog ass tricks. Right? Ain't no pussy like new pussy. But the problem with that is, where am I going?
I don't know. You were in frame before. You just moved, but it's
there we go.
Now.
Okay,
you're good.
The problem is that when you do that, you're adding bad advice onto bad advice. I see you looking down. Are people texting?
Oh no, saying, I have the questions on my phone.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
I was just gearing up for what is the next question getting into. So we're still on this thing about you. So you've already answered this about how much sexual trauma plays in the way we're intimate with sex. So we'll just go over to the next question is, how do you explore your sexuality with unresolved sexual trauma from childhood? And how do you go forward with having healthy sex?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record. You gotta communicate.
Yeah.
If you have not gone to therapy, start there. Right? Because this is not a race, this is a journey, and trauma like this doesn't go away. You learn how to cope, you learn how to, I want to be clear, it's not, as somebody who is a survivor, I do not identify as a survivor, I identify as a thriver. Right? So I have flipped that narrative, but it doesn't mean it goes away. Sexual assault and my experience with sexual assault is in my work every day. It's a part of why I got into this work in the first place. But I go back to communication. Masturbation is incredibly important, because masturbation allows you to identify what your pleasure points are alone. And then you need to be having dialogue with your partners. I would encourage a therapist. And here's the other thing. Your girlfriends. When you look at the statistics of people who have been sexually assaulted, it's so many of us. So start having these conversations with your friends
that you can trust
and identify. What?
The friends that you trust, that you've built a rapport with.
Yeah. I mean, don't just you at the bar like, girl, let me tell you what happened to me. But I will tell you, as I was in grad school and I was bartending, a lot of people would disclose to me and say something like, I've never told anybody that. And to all the ladies that are watching, oftentimes it was men of color. We do not talk about that. We do not discuss the experience of men and their experiences with sexual violence, because in our communities, we've oftentimes normalized it as, no, you weren't sexually assaulted, you got lucky. And that breaks my heart. Think about like Lil Wayne. He's talked about how like somebody got him, put him in a room with and paid women to perform sex acts on him at 12. That's not consensual sex. That's assault. But when we don't have a place for men to process this, it doesn't help them be aware when they cross the line. So there's so many things that just are flipped up when it comes to this subject matter, because we're not having enough conversations about it. We're not normalizing conversations about it. And it's happening to so many of us, or has happened to so many of us.
Okay, so getting into the next question, and we just switch over from sexual trauma to the power balance, which is actually something, this age gap between Eric and Edie is something that I see crop up a lot on like TikTok. A lot of people promoting young women, older men relationships, like significantly older. And so the question is, are there ways to sustain healthy relationships with power imbalances like Edie and Eric's?
Very difficult. Very difficult. Because you have to remember that those power dynamics are usually, especially when it comes to age, you got to ask yourself, why would somebody this much older be into someone this young unless it was because they wanted to reign power and control over, right? Now, I'm not here to bash anybody who has dated older individuals. I've dated older men, some of whom were 13 years my senior. But you have to really check in on what the power dynamics are. And again, broken record, Michelle, you have to talk about it. Because if you move through a relationship and don't address it, then it's the pink elephant in the room. And it just weighs you down even more. I think there could be ways to have healthy and sustainable relationships with those type of power dynamics off. However, when you start to think about age, financial gaps, education gaps, the more spaces in which we see the power dynamic really off, it's much more difficult to have a healthy and sustainable relationship there. Not saying it's impossible, but if you have all these varying factors and then you add on to it that you're not even addressing it, then you can't move forward. Because any healthy relationship has to have open and honest communication, especially when you get into things like BDSM. That's like the foundation of healthy BDSM and consensual BDSM.
What did you think of Eric and his wife's sort of non-monogamous setup?
Well, I think that's a lot of couples. They just don't say it to each other.
Oh.
I always tell people, a lot of us are polyamorous, our partners just don't know. But I too, I don't know if any of you have read any of Esther Perel's work.
Oh.
But she kind of speaks to the idea that sometimes opening up the relationship can be healthy. Now, if it's don't ask, the don't ask, don't tell, that could bring a whole lot of heap of pain. But it seems like a lot of people don't want to address, they want to just very laissez-faire, like, oh, well, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like an ethical slut, which talks about ethical like non-monogamy out, and not just polyamory, but all the like you can be a serial monogamous and all the other ways that your relationship. But it makes the point that part of the way to actually be polyamorous is to actually be honest. You cannot be polyamorous if you're not honest. It's not polyamory.
It's not polyamory, exactly. It's you living your life.
You being feckless.
I mean, that's what that is.
What advice would you give to Edie?
Therapy. Again, I'm gonna just go back to, there was a lot of issues going on there. You know, there was a lot of self issues going on there that needed to be talked about, from body image, from the image of self in general, the sexuality issues, but all of that was rooted in self work that needed to be worked out. And it's not something she was gonna be able to do in the bedroom. So, I mean, it's not, again, and I'm not saying this because I want to skeet out of that question. It's literally the truth.
Would you give any advice to Eric's wife?
Well, I think she needs to decide what she wants to do and be okay with it. She needs to make a decision. And I think I guess for his wife, the character for me didn't really move me very much. It was a lot of passive aggressive behavior was happening.
Very white woman, yeah.
Very, like, make sure the bills is paid, don't. So I think that in that, it's that white woman fragility. Okay? And this idea that I need to be the best wife I can be regardless of what is going on. And this idea that as long as I am that picture perfect Instagram, we look great on paper, it doesn't matter what's happening because I am looking like the perfect, pure, fabulous. I think that this happens quite a bit. It's how we've normalized gender roles and roles in relationship. And I think I've said it for a long time. White women are taught to be docile and accepting, right? And Black women are often taught to be self-sufficient and taking care of themselves, and white women are to be taken care of, right? So I think that in that, we just have to remember that that is how we have been indoctrinated to believe relationships are from the beginning of time. And it happens for so long, and it goes in for so long that we don't even realize it's subconscious.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep going back to therapy, because that's when somebody's going to hold you accountable and say, well, hold on now.
It's just so hard to find a good therapist. Especially if you're looking at non-traditional relationships.
Well, see, I think there's two things here. I think that one, in non-traditional relationships,
Oh, you just went muted. Did you hit something? No. Your guest has muted themselves, it says. I can see you, I just can't hear you. Do you have like a thing on the bottom of your screen? It still says on my side that you muted yourself. Like I can see that you muted yourself. All right, they're going to come back in a minute. Y'all, this is just hard. But it's such a good conversation. Sorry, y'all.
I'm never going to be invited back again.
No, it's third time. It's fine. It's probably my side.
Oh, because I saw it disconnected for a minute and there was a black screen for you.
Oh, yeah, that was my webcam. That's my camera, the battery. But it just said,
yeah,
but it's fine.
Okay. So anyway, I think that we have to remember, and I hope that people can understand that these are all really complex, and finding a good help to help you unpack a lot of the alternative relationship stuff. The first thing you need to do is figure out what the relationship is with yourself. And that's why I keep going back to therapy. And I'm not even talking about sex therapy. I'm talking about therapy. Because you need to get to the core of, why do I like this? And that is some of the things that I think we don't want to realize, is how connected we are to our experiences of our parents. You know, I know some people think Freudian was a little bit crazy, but think about for a moment who your parents are. And then I want you to think about the people you've had relationships with and what some of their characteristics are. And you will start to be able to connect some dots, for good and for bad.
I have to sit on that one. Like, how might my parents be showing up in the partners that I choose?
Yep. And in addition to that, how did your parents display, even if they were apart, what did their relationships, sex lives, obviously you were a child, you probably didn't know about their sex lives, but just what you saw, was there people coming in and out of the house? Was your dad, one of your parents, a monogamist? What was affection? What did affection look like growing up?
You know what's interesting is because I did a video on ethical slut, and I've definitely had this theme on my Patreon about talking about the need for us expanding our viewpoint on relationships, but hearing from people that grew up in households where they realized as adults that their parents had alternative lifestyles. So their parents obviously had some honesty and communication between the partners about being polyamorous and open, but they did not disclose it to their children.
Right.
And hearing about how people have struggled with not knowing what was going on with their parents and then resenting this identity or lifestyle as a negative, even though there might be real benefits for them, you know,
Mhm.
expanding their preview of what a relationship should look like.
Well, that goes back to us not normalizing conversations about sexuality, love, and relationship in our community, right? And we're all adults. Ask your parents about their relationships now. I have parents who overshare.
Yeah, my
So,
parents were overshares, so I knew as a child what was going.
right. But,
What was going
the
on.
other thing is like I know people and I know couples who are married unhappily and have the very similar open non-monogamy type of relationship with the don't ask, don't tell, and we're only together for the kids, or they have some rules. And some of them, it's like, do you think your kids don't notice that you're sleeping in separate bedrooms?
Yeah, so
Because that is what's going to help form what they think a relationship should look like.
and so it's interesting, like think about how traumatic this experience is for the Black adopted daughter, who's like
She don't
first
know anything.
interpersonal relationship with another Black woman is the adulterer in her home. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
dag, I finished the book feeling so bad for that young girl.
I just think it's interesting because it's what is what is it teaching them, and then what is the media messaging outside of the book and the character and it being an adopted child and all of these. I mean, there's a lot of intersections there, but then to have to process what society says about these types of relationships. And and then who do you become? Because that's kind of like your example. How do you have healthy relationships? How do you know what being monogamous is?
Absolutely.
If you've never had an example of it.
It's unfortunate. All right, so the last question for this chat is, if you could reestablish sexual norms or the sex education fundamentals, what norms or baseline education would you encourage everyone to know? You muted yourself again. You just hit it again. You muted yourself. You're still muted. You literally touched the screen and then muted. She keeps hitting the screen on her phone and muting herself. Girl. Stop.
This eCam does not.
You gotta stop touching your phone.
I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so baseline education. First and foremost, we need a federally mandated K through 12, age appropriate, medically accurate program, national program.
The whites in Alabama would have a fit.
So would the Blacks in North Carolina. So
True.
I mean, we're screwed any way you slice it. And so would all the teachers, so would all the church people. But let me tell you something. What we have to remember is that when sex, I say this all the time, sex and sexuality is from the womb to the tomb. Okay? So by that, what I mean is you don't start understanding your sexuality when you hit puberty or you grow a pube or you have underarm hair or you get your period. You are starting to formulate your understanding around sexuality as a whole thing, but from before you were born, because we have these gender reveal parties. So we, as adults, we start to say, okay, well, it's a boy. They're born a boy, so we need to put them in blue. We as parents start to establish these things. I've worked with a lot of parents who don't know that masturbation is totally normal. It's a part of body exploration in small children, yet they want to chastise their children instead of saying, you know what, I know it feels good when you do that, but you can't do that in the living room and nobody else should do that with you, right? So these are the kinds of lessons. That's what I meant by age appropriate. Because in kindergarten through 5th grade, you have to establish what healthy friendship looks like, what healthy communication in friendships look like, because friendships become relationships and romantic relationships as we move into adulthood. And the way we deal with our friends is inevitably going to transfer over to the way we deal in our romantic relationships. That's why I'm saying if you are a child that's watching your parents and they fight constantly, that's gonna, and you think that's how they have a disagreement, is they yell and they scream, you're gonna be that little kid in school who, when they get mad, is yelling and screaming. This is all connected. So that is what I say is federally mandated sex education, and it needs to be sex positive. Sex is not a dirty word. We all do it. How did we get here?
Okay, points were made. Points were made. All right, thank you for joining us for this live. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
You guys can follow me on Instagram at MHSexpert.
Are you still in
On Twitter.
Clubhouse? Do you in Clubhouse rooms?
I am in Clubhouse. I oftentimes have been really, really busy because I actually now am working on a new app called Community X, which is a social network for social good. So when you join the app, you put in your 5 areas of social justice cause areas, and then we build you a community.
Oh, wow.
Based on that. So I want everybody to find me there too. Follow me, get active. Let's do some actions. Let's get this federally mandated sex ed. Let's get it done. Let's do it together.
All right, I'm gonna end this live here. Don't hang up though, and I'll see y'all on the other side. Deuces.
Bye. Thank you for your patience.